Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on techniques and strategies for contingency planning and resiliency. I'm Michael Swan, currently an independent consultant delivering fractional CTO and technology advisory services to companies of all sizes. I bring an extensive background in telecom financial services with multiple leadership roles in companies ranging from startup to large enterprise, and I've been working closely with Zodiac since 2022. And with me today, there's John Matsilios.
Hi, everyone. John Matsilios here. Bring many years experience in managing portfolios, programs, projects, primarily in the financial sector. So we're at banks, insurance companies as well. Lots of experience in dealing with projects that have gone fairly well and mainly projects that have not gone so well.
So let's jump right in. We're here today to talk about some strategies and techniques for contingency and resiliency. As a leader, I see strong resiliency and contingency planning as crucial to personal program and business success. Deliveries should be frictionless. The role of a program sponsor at the time of delivery should be the most boring role in the program, not the one that's actively involved in fixing things or making decisions because it's all been well planned and put out. John, as an experienced program director, why is resiliency and contingency planning important to you?
It's actually one of the most important things that you can do, because almost 100% of the projects that I've dealt with or programs or programs that have worked for me need to actually get into their contingency. People will make the argument that no, we deliver on time, on budget, but that really, when you do your contingency planning, that's part of your overall budget. So you are going to need it, and you are going to have to access money, resources, whatever else it is that you need there.
So that's interesting, John. I mean, we've talked about this, and you mentioned this last week when we were discussing. We've both been involved in hundreds of programs and deliveries. And you brought up that stat. You felt that nearly 100% of the programs, successful or not, ended up invoking at least part of the contingency and resiliency plan. From your experience, what makes a contingency and resiliency plan effective?
Really, you have to kind of ignore happy path, and not ignore it completely, but consider most activities and tasks do not follow that happy path. Actually, you have to start thinking about how can things fail. A lot of us don't do that when we start planning out our task milestones. And I'm talking primarily PDLC here, but it's very true when you're working with Agile. Your risk log should be helping you determine how things may fail. And that's when you start planning for that contingency. Well, if A happens, how do we deal with it? What's option B? What's option C to actually deal with it? And so that's, I find, especially a little bit, people starting their careers in project management, that's the type of thinking that they haven't come across yet. And as you get seasoned and you get the battle scars from not actually having things completed on time, budget, whatever it is, you start thinking, well, I know things are going to go wrong. Here are the things based on my previous work I've done or who I've talked to, and they've given me advice on that I need to start planning for. And that's the compliance and resiliency piece that you really need to be thinking about.
Okay. So when if I hear, can you characterize for me where, what has been the primary reason a contingency and resiliency plan has gone well? And what are a couple of reasons where a resiliency and contingency plan has gone really poorly?
The ones that have gone really well, there's many examples of poor ones, but the ones that have gone really well is when you have a lot of experienced people and you bring them to the table and you start the conversation well before you start the work and says, okay, we have these deliverables to do. Have we any experience in doing this in the past? And there's typically a few people who've had that kind of experience. And you start asking and you start having those conversations. So it's you start with a retrospective. You start with the lessons learned before you even get down the path. I remember one initiative I was working on last year with a group. I was asked to jump in. About this project is completely off the rails. It's not going the way it was planned. And the first thing I did was actually have that retrospective and then we determined that the approach that was being taken wasn't quite the right one, and we were able to pivot and shift, and then allowed us to go down the path we should go down. But then again, started building out our contingency plan moving forward. What if we run into these other hurdles?
Okay. So would you say that things have gone well when we've been able to incorporate tried and true activities with well-defined outcomes into our resiliency and contingency plan? But things tend to go poorly when there's lack of alignment, or falter when there's lack of alignment between technology and product teams, or the outcomes are not well defined. And having people on the same page can become chaotic. Is that in line with what your experience has been?
And that's true, because most people tend to go, both technology and business, go down this happy path, and everyone loves the happy path because that's where you think you're going to get your results. It's you have to remove yourself, both technology and business, and start thinking outside that happy path. So when you base all your plans around that, that's the primary thought. You forget, or you're not aware of what might happen, and then when you go back to your contingency, what happens then? You haven't planned for it. There's no backup plans. They become real, and you're reacting instead of having the forethought of having a script on it. And that's something that you best to avoid, is not be reactive, but be proactive. It really comes back to that risk management.
Okay. So how would we, if things go more poorly within, how do we move the contingency plans, irrespective of the type of things? How do we move the contingency and resiliency plans that we recognize, or how do we recognize that they aren't going to be effective? And how do we move them more to a well-defined, tried and true type outcome to increase the chance of success? All right.
One approach I've seen you, sorry.
Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, one approach I've seen used successfully is really the risk management. So RAID logs, whether you're doing it again, straight PDLC or Agile, make particular use of your RAID logs, because it's those weekly conversations, maybe even twice a week, where you go through that, and within the log itself, you start building out that script with the actions to take it when certain markers are hit or when certain things happen. So one prime example of this is a developer, a much needed developer, was unavailable. A situation came where they had to leave the country right away. That was captured on a risk log, saying, what if this key personnel was not here? How do we deal with that? So we reverted back to the RAID log. Okay, we had a backup plan in place, and that was used effectively because that person had to leave the next day. It was a family emergency that they had to deal with, and they had to leave the next day. But we were able to quickly pivot and continue on the work itself, and we were able to make that deliverable because that person had to be away for the next 2-3 weeks. But because we already had pre-planned it and we had rehearsed that type of scripting, we knew that certain triggers came along, and we were able to put it into play.
Right. That's an interesting set of scenarios. So you talked a little bit about a happy path, and we understand that this is where we just create plans based on the assumption that everything will go smoothly. We've both seen this happen many, many, many times. It's optimistic. We focus on the ideal scenario. We might put some consideration in for contingency, and then realize that, okay, there's a great percentage of projects that fail. So let's actually start building a contingency and resiliency plan. The challenge then tends to be is that the contingency and resiliency plan is also built happy path.
Oh, yes.
And so, which can really exacerbate the problem in that the happy path itself for the resiliency doesn't work. So what are some of the ways we could avoid those pitfalls? What are some of the ways that you've been able to look at and say, hey, real techniques of, I've got to ask different questions, or what is the type of mindset we need to have to be able to actually plan effectively for resiliency and contingency?
You know, those are great points you bring up because of this happy path mindset that we have when we're planning. We tend to do the same with our contingency plans. It's always happy path. Hey, I know which triggers are going to come up. I know this is what I'm going to have to do. And we plan our contingency around happy path. We have to really train ourselves and start thinking of different scenarios. I mentioned earlier in the conversation how you might want to rely on a few senior people who've done this before and ask those types of questions. And it's not just a project manager or a program manager, the one should be asking this. This is a team as a whole should be asking this and say, okay, we got happy path, but what happens if it's not? One thing I've used very successfully in my career is the 3-point estimation. So you have your positive point of view, you have your negative point of view, you have your realistic point of view. Somewhere in there is what's going to happen in reality. So you tend to put your contingency plans together on here's my happy path, here's when stuff starts going wrong, here's what I think is realistic, but you don't get rid of your happy path or your negative path, we'll call it, way of thinking. That's in your back pocket or your risk log primarily because you want to document these things so you can fall back on it. So we as a group, as a project management group or as a program group, really need to start thinking that very rarely do things stick to happy path. And what do we need to do to be able to adjust? Mike, I'd like to ask you, I'm thinking, I've been doing a lot of talk about the happy path, but as someone who's been an executive in many different places and you provide the type of consulting, what does an executive look for in terms of the planning itself? Is it always happy path with them?
It can be, but I think what's really important is to actually get into the mindset of planning for failure while planning for success. One of the pitfalls of happy path and being overconfident is the tenant thing is we start a program, we plan for success. We put out the plan that we think is going to happen. We look at it reasonably. We apply the experience that we have. But if we actually gone into that robust planning and scenario analysis and stress testing to really think through, well, what about failure? And I bring this back to how important it is because, as you said, nearly 100% of the programs you've been involved with have required some level of resiliency and contingency to be invoked. Things rarely actually go happy path, although certainly want to plan them that way. And it doesn't even really matter what methodology of program management or delivery you're using. It does come into how flexible your culture is, your architecture, being able to foster that type of environment to make sure that plans are adaptable, that they're evolving with business risk, that you've actually engaged not just the technology risk, but the business risk, the operational risk within there, and really fostering a culture that values resilience and preparedness is also important. So how did we think critically about the critical risks? Did we ignore a risk because we didn't fully understand the risk, right? Or and you always do have to balance within that how much time do you invest in doing that type of work and preparing for failure as much as you are preparing for success. But I do see it's a mindset that absolutely has to be in place to be able to come up with an effective resiliency and contingency plan. Expect the unexpected. And no plan is perfect. I once had a mentor of mine make the comment to me that the moment a plan is put on paper, it's out of date.
Oh, yes.
Always being that adaptability, looking at it, understanding where the risks are, having an architecture and a strategy in place that allow you to adapt to those risks very quickly, to be able to move past those, and to try to ensure a higher level of success within that. And then communications, not ignoring it, making sure that there's clarity in roles and responsibilities. And all these things are the textbook things that'll work on. There's no specific playbook that'll work in every scenario.
Yep.
But the idea is that you need to look at is to how much effort do you put in each one? How do you actually get there and make that happen? So that's sort of my mindset on this one. It's really about the flexibility and the culture and to be adaptable, right? And to communicate.
What do you think about scenario playing? I've done that with some teams where we play out certain scenarios so that we're kind of practice. Have you run across that as well?
Yeah, and actually, I think it's a critical part of it. Right? Start thinking through. So, what if I do? You yourself mentioned earlier in the conversation that the contingency and resilience plans that you've seen go the best, be the most effective, are the ones that are tried and true, where everyone knows exactly what to do. And I think scenario planning is one of the only ways to get there. So, what happens if? And then actually testing out some of those mitigations that are put in place. And then what happens if those don't work? Now, again, look at risk of the whole program, size of the business opportunity, size of the financial impact, size of the customer impact, size of the people impact. Within that, decide, how important is a risk and how much mitigation do you put around it and how much testing you put into that.
Have you seen the use of if-then statements when you're doing this type of scenario analysis? If A happens, then B.
Yes, and certainly within the different types of risk analysis that have been done and presented by the program directors. How have you used that technique to be successful?
Yeah. And so I've actually tied a lot of my contingency planning around that. If A happens, then B. But to actually execute on B, this is what you have to have in place, whether it's extra resources, funding for those resources. So that's your contingency planning. You have to pay the people that are going to do the work if it takes you way off the happy path. So if you hit those triggers, like we said, so if A happens, then we have to do B. What if we're not prepared to do B? Well, hopefully we have a C or possibly even a D in place, individual options. And again, it's time, money, the resourcing or staffing. There's a cost. There's always a cost to veering off the happy path. And like I said a few times now, almost 100% of the projects that I've dealt with would stray from the happy path. I really like the idea of planning your contingency around those if statements and ensuring that you have the script all played out and you practice that scenario. And it's almost a weekly conversation, and depending on where you are in the project, hey, we're in the middle of the development, we've gone 6 sprints in, and we don't think this is going the right path. We need to have further conversations with our architects because we're not seeing the results we want to see in our testing. Okay, have we kind of planned for that? Because what if the results don't align with our architecture planning? Then B, we need to have a conversation, and can we pivot? And then the options around that, it's going to cost X amount of dollars and Y amount of time to bring us back where we want to be. Or we start seeing it as an opportunity. We're not quite where we want to be. And contingency planning could be around opportunity. The market has changed. Do we have money so we can pivot, so we can meet this type of deliverable now? And that's a different type of thinking. But again, it's part of contingency and resiliency. Can we pivot? And do we have the money and the people to be able to do that? Because if we continue down this path, there'll be no market for us. We need to change. What do you think?
That's a good point about it may not be, there is a mindset at sometimes that contingency and resiliency is just about something going wrong, something operationally, something going wrong in the program, but it may be that the desired outcome has changed. The desired business outcome has changed. And how do you pivot within that? And that's a really good point that you bring up there on contingency and resiliency. And it goes beyond what potentially we were initially thinking about within that. So when I think about this, as you mentioned, you've done hundreds of programs. I've done hundreds of programs. Always seeing contingency and resiliency being used in one form or another. And we've highlighted that, contingency and resiliency go well when it's really well defined, when it's tried and true. We know exactly what we're doing. We just do it. That doesn't take into account a lot of uncertainty that can happen in the real world.
Right.
Things don't go well when there's a lack of clarity about what needs to be delivered, or even what the risk is, understanding the risk, where it's not clear if there's alignment between the teams involved. And I think what it comes down to is that, and then there's a number of items that need to be looked at in order to be able to mitigate those problems and create more tried and true scenarios so that the resiliency and contingency can happen very clearly. And I think, we've also determined that happy path thinking is one of our biggest concerns. That optimism, not that we walk into every project with the idea, every program with the idea that we're going to be wildly successful, but also being able to check our own biases, thoughts, forethoughts to be able to understand that we also need to plan for failure. And it's not planning for failure as I'm planning not to succeed at the program. It's planning for failure in the mindset of, I'm going to make sure that I am successful in the program because we'll be ready when the invariable pitfalls happen. And so it's interesting. We've talked about robust planning as one way to contingency. We've talked about stress testing.
Yes.
Talked about scenario planning. Incorporating feedback loops is absolutely incredible.
Oh, that's a very good point.
Within that, we need to be able to learn from our past projects. History does repeat. We need to have that expertise and not always, being able to communicate that through. We need to prioritize clear communication. We need to make sure plans are adaptable, and we need to have a culture for this to be able to work and be adaptable within that. And one of the other things I would add in that is we also need cross-functional collaboration.
Yes.
And that is, after you've put the program together with all the stakeholders, have someone external look at it. Have someone who's not I'm the customer, I'm the deliverer, or anything else, and look at it, and they may point out things that you've never thought of because you're in it. And
that feedback loop is so important. You're right. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
To have that feedback. So here's an interesting thing, and I bring this up because all of us have been in the industry, and we all have our little war stories or things that stick in your mind. And what I've always found is that the failures tend to stick in your mind more than the successes, because that's the learning opportunity.
They do. Yeah, those are the what ifs.
Right. And when sharing these insights, does all this guarantee success? And unfortunately not. There's always situations where the resiliency plan just doesn't prepare for it. And I remember one, I'm going to go way back in my career, back to the early days when I was still someone with hands on the keyboard. Right? And I was working for a software company whose software ran the technology floor, the factory floor of a well-known international manufacturer. And there was a failure in the middle of the night. And I was in support, and I really date myself here, got the page and got logged into their systems and looked at it and said, hey, we've got corruption. This thing is not going to be recovered. So what do we do? And there was a playbook. It was a very clear playbook. It was an incredibly well thought out playbook. And it showed me exactly what to do. And again, I'm doing this at 3 a.m. I'm tired. I needed to know exactly what to do. I pulled out the playbook. I practiced it. Everything was good. I issued the recovery. The entire outage should have been 25 minutes. And everything just seemed to stop.
Oh, no.
And it went on. And, suddenly like 25 minutes became 2 hours. 2 hours became 4 hours. 4 hours became this thing. It did not seem to be working. Everything was done right. Every single scenario had actually been planned for. All of the instructions were followed to the letter. What nobody knew is that in the recovery process, there was actually a missing feature.
Oh, no.
It hadn't actually been discovered during testing because the size of the testing data sets were nowhere close to the size of the production data sets. And so this thing was going to take forever. It was absolutely not going to work. Now, in retrospect, and sure enough, people went in, figured out how to do the program differently and get it going. In retrospect, it was one of those cases of you couldn't do better planning. Robust planning was there. Every possible scenario was there. And it still just went completely wrong. And, one of those cases that should have been a 20-minute blip was, many, many, many hours of lost revenue, of factory floor not being able to pump out product. And it always stuck with me. And that's what really got into that thinking of, so how do you actually plan for failure? And what do you do? Now, in that case, the most important thing was the culture of the organization that valued resiliency and preparedness. And initially of, okay, we've run into a problem we're not aware of before. This should have worked. Didn't panic. Let's actually go back and figure out how to actually solve the problem. And then let's go figure out why the problem actually happened, which then led to the continuous improvement of the product getting a lot better. Right. In that. But it was something you had to live for. And you think for that self of all the different emotions, things you go for when everything's perfect.
What did I miss?
What did I miss? And, I think that it's important to learn from those. And that was one of the reasons why I look at it now, is why this is such an important thing. I want, as a program sponsor, I would like all deliveries to be non-events.
What do you mean by that?
Team after, meaning they happened. That I know the team, and I know when I'm working with you, John, that the team has got all of those pieces in place, and everything reasonable that can be put in place is put in place. And if it still doesn't work, I know it's because you didn't actually think it through from a the failure mode and where it's going to go. That you didn't take the happy path. It'll be something that really nobody thought of, and things will always go wrong. And then the idea is that when something has gone wrong like that, it's what's that fostering that culture of just, and what do we do from here? We'd all love to have time machines. It never works.
Yeah, I know once we were talking, and I asked you as an executive sponsor, you mentioned that non-events, and the line that really stuck with me was when you told me that I want to be able to sleep at night because I know everything's taken care of. And so if we're managing programs or projects, and we take that mindset at the grassroots level, let's make sure these are non-events so that our exec sponsor can sleep at night. This is what needs to be in place for that to happen.
Right. And in contrast to that, as a sponsor, I've got to make sure that the environment, that the culture, that everything is in place, that you can actually make that happen. Chances are, if I'm not sleeping at night, I'm probably part of the reason I'm not sleeping at night. I need to be able to have that through. So, John, this has been a really great conversation. I think we've covered a lot of great points within there. Should we open up to see if the audience has any questions for us?
Oh, for sure. I don't see any questions coming in.
So, now I just told you one of my nightmare stories, and that was a long time ago. And I've learned things like that. So what's the one thing that sticks in your mind, John, that you whenever somebody asks you about, oh, I remember when.
Yeah, this was a similar type of story many years ago. This was really my first multi-million-dollar project, multiple work streams. It was changing over to a new data center back in the days when data centers were actually physical buildings and we had to go load applications on and so on. And thought I had everything in place. We had a robust risk log. We talk constantly about what's at risk and doing things, testing and so on. We got to the point where we did our cutover and the application would not work on the new infrastructure. Would not work properly, let's say. It had started writing to the database. We had not considered that scenario. We had not gathered the type of feedback that this might actually happen. This organization, that application for them was down for 3 business days. They lost quite a bit of money in that, and it was literally day and night working. There was no sleep. to try to fix it. We had to bring in a whole bunch of coders and testers to rewrite the code. And at the end of the day, when we did the retrospective, it was found that the code cannot handle how quick the responses were now on the new infrastructure of all things.
Well,
And
you know,
so the messages were kind of skipping along too fast for the code to handle it. And it goes back to the days when there was a lot of sequential items when it came to coding. And it was something that I really learned. I was given opportunities to continue after, because there was no finger pointing, thankfully, back to culture that you talked about. And we were able to take that lesson and ensure that it never happened again.
it's interesting you say that, and the technology has certainly helped in some ways get things better. I mean, when I talked about that situation too long ago, it wasn't absolutely not cost effective to have a data set in test as big as a data set in production.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
And even that problem then, with the current compute and memory and everything else capabilities, wouldn't be a problem today. Now, we do have a question from Wayne. Seems like we need to plan for every possible might go wrong to take a lot of extra time. So how do we balance planning the happy path with possible problems? And yeah, I certainly have my and try to get into it. There's no set formula within that. You have to look at the impact of each one. And so when you look at it and say, okay, here's a potential risk, what's that going to do to the program? And sometimes we're dead wrong. Sometimes we're dead wrong. We make an assessment and say, okay, this one is a material risk. We need to go deep into how we're going to fix it. And we might make a decision to say, nah, this is low risk. You know, it might happen. But even if it does, the impact is maybe going to be, you know, it's not really going to material impact the outcome, the schedule, the budget, or anything like that. Those are the ones when they go wrong, are the ones you kind of go back and learn from and get better and better at doing that planning. But I think scenario planning is a key way to do that. And then it's having that upfront sort of view as to what are the risks I'm actually willing to go deeper on. John, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's what you said. It's really weighing the impact versus the probability. When you start doing that, then you can bubble up the ones that have a higher probability. And those are the ones you really start with your scenario planning. Another exercise in addition to that is you start going along themes, because the solution to many of these issues or potential risks where you'll need your contingency planning is around certain themes. Is it a network issue? Well, there's so many things that can happen within a network. You don't have to deep dive, but at least you know if it's a network issue, here's how to identify it's a network issue. Here are the people we're going to need. They're going to need time. So you don't deep dive into that. You don't take a lot of time. You got to take some time, but you don't need a lot of extra time and cost to start with those scenarios. And the more you've actually run across these, because every project has these issues and they tend to happen again and again, you build up a repertoire of here's what we do when this runs along. And it doesn't take extra time because you already know it's going to happen. Any other questions coming in? So here's a little contingency story for you. Okay.
No, I think, Wayne, that's a good point. You like to think of it as having a fire emergency evac plan or carrying a spare tire in your car. And it's one of those things of, you know, deciding on how much insurance do you need, right, within that. Because cover most scenarios, it absolutely can get time consuming for every problem. You want to be able to
cost versus risk, yeah. So here's a real life situation. Problems with my laptop here where I'm sitting. I couldn't get onto this webinar. I had to run to my desk over to where I was sitting today, grab an iPad that I had in my bag there, and get onto this webinar through my iPad. Contingency planning. I thought in the morning, what if I have problems? Let me throw my iPad in my bag just in case. And I had tested the StreamYard link on my iPad just to make sure it worked. And what do you know? I'm on my iPad right now. There's contingency and resiliency in life right there.
As the experience of live demos always go wrong somewhere. Right. Yes, I thought we were going to do the contingency of having someone step in for you at the last minute, John.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I was late coming on. Yes. Well, maybe we can recap a little bit of what we spoke about. Um, Resiliency planning, what really stuck out in our conversation today was the cross-functional collaboration, getting different points of view in there, being able to document some of that without taking a lot of extra time and cost to do that, but around those general themes, having that feedback loop, revisiting your plans every once in a while. You can't, or actually more than once in a while, it should be a regular cadence. You can't just write out, here's everything we're going to do if something happens and put it on a shelf somewhere. You have to be living it. You have to be having those discussions so that cross-functional collaboration and feedback loop are really important, and maybe not think about happy path all the time because things break as you go along. Did I miss anything there, Mike? Anything to add to that?
No, I think you pretty much gathered everything that we talked about that, and I think we could probably sit here and talk for hours of war stories where we've seen
War
things go.
stories.
We've learned from every single one of them, right? In that things, and even from some of the successes of why a program was successful. And I strongly believe in in the flexibility of the architecture. The culture is critically important, but as you talked about, it's as well as making it okay to plan for failure.
Exactly.
And that's orthogonal to so many people's thinking of course, I didn't take on the project to fail. And we're not saying you're taking on the project to fail. But you've got to have that critical mindset of what could actually cause it to fail. And then that learning back, that telemetry stream, and sort of look at it and say, okay, here's how I'm going to make this project more resilient. And this can be applied to any type of activity that's going on, whether it be a program, or whether it be something in operations, where you're building something, running something. All of those are really looking at that. What are the various failure modes, and what have I done about them? And I really like your little anecdote today of yesterday you actually tested your iPad to make sure that you could get into the link because you knew you weren't going to be on your home network.
Right.
You knew that you needed to have connectivity. I'm also sitting here with multiple devices, but I'm in a very stable spot from being able to get on here. But you actually did that planning. That was simple. It didn't take you a lot of time to do it, but you actually spent that extra 5 minutes, and we were able to get the webinar to run properly. And that's exactly what this is about. And sometimes it doesn't have to be huge and heavy as much as just to think about the simple things that can go wrong and have a plan. And most of the plan needs to be knowing what to do when it happens.
When it happens, yes. A little bit of preparedness ahead of time.
One thing
we also touched upon opportunities, which maybe we talk a little bit more about that.
Well, actually, I want to go in a different direction if you let me, John, because something that actually we talked about is, when Wayne just asked a question, we'll get to it in a moment about, how do we recommend a way to plan for Black Hat thinking or pessimist day within that, right? And to have that opposite view as to how things can go within that. And actually, why don't we address that first? So,
sure.
It's kind of with anything else. So, we want to take a stab at this one, John?
Sure. How can we go ahead? This is a good one because we're so fixated on the happy path. We don't actually take the time to sit there and start to challenge. We talk about, I always talk about with various teams I deal with, the 5 whys or the Black Hat thinking, like, what can go wrong and why? And if that happens, why? And you start asking those questions, and that actually starts prompting, and you get the feedback come up. You should really make that part of a regular cadence and doing these exercises, because as the project goes along, like I was talking to a PM just before this call, their project's been going along for about 6 months right now, happy path, and all of a sudden they run into an issue where one of the stakeholders was missed. There's an expectation the stakeholder is going to deliver something, and they're not going to make those dates. And if we had been going through the process of questioning things along the way, doing these pessimist day or Black Hat type of thinking exercises, we would have said, what if team B over there can't come in on a regular schedule. And those are the exercises we should have in place on a regular basis, building up that cadence. It's back to what we've been talking about. Get off the happy path.
So Wayne's actually asking how we do that. So it's interesting, Wayne. I think what you're aiming for is how do you almost gamify? How do you make it fun?
Oh, yes.
Did it right and so forth like this. So I get the idea of a pessimist day as an eternal optimist, not the.
I know.
But people thinking about it is saying, okay, let's reward who can come up with the most potential problems.
Oh, I like that.
Or something like that. I haven't used any of those pieces within that. It's been more of a critical thinking conversation, or bringing some experienced people and saying, hey, what if this happened, or what if that happened, or what would we do in this case, or so forth like this. But I kind of like to, I think that's where you're going, Wayne. I kind of like that as to why not, right? And I do believe sometimes you have to show the plan to somebody completely not involved.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
That we potentially put into things based on, well, it's going to work this way. Okay. And I think it really is important that when something does go wrong, it be as clear as possible as to who does what, when, and how. So the last one I wanted to bring up, John, because we spoke about it very briefly, is often what's done, what I see in these types of scenario planning is you'll have something like a tabletop exercise.
Yes.
Right.
I love those.
Except, are they effective?
If used correctly, if used as part of the exercise to draw out the what ifs.
You see, that's one of the challenges I've kind of observed is sometimes it's a checkbox. Yep, we sat around the table and did it. But I think it's absolutely
I've seen that many times.
Yeah. Practice of, and I know something went wrong, and I know exactly what to do. And it's not for everyone, but I think it falls very closely into that scenario planning of, okay, so let's do a tabletop on a couple of the key critical risks. Does everyone know what to do? And I think that's
and I found a lot of people depend on the person putting the exercise together to tell them what to do, and that's where these tabletop exercises tend to fail. It's well, actually, no. We should put it into two parts. There's when I do a tabletop, I throw the scenario out there, and that's to gather the information on what should be done, what went right, what went wrong, and then there's a follow-up to that tabletop where you actually go through the type of script you put together. So you really should be breaking that out into two. The what ifs, now tell me what you're going to do. How are you going to react to this? That's where you start documenting, building out your script, and then a follow-up. Okay, let's follow the script, and you throw a wrench in there as well when you do that. It takes time and effort to do, but on larger programs, it's well worth it.
And I think that's where it goes back into what the business risk and business opportunity is that looking at, as we were asked earlier about, well, how do you balance between possible problems and how much investment you put into it? It's once you've made a determination that a risk is material to the program, investing in actually putting in the training, the firefighter training, the contingency training around that risk is probably less than what would happen if you don't know if you're not ready when the problem happens to the overall cost of the program. And you're always going to be balancing that. And John, you made an interesting comment to me about, you were working on a program where the program sponsor wanted to release the contingency funds, and you were like, no, because you knew that all the funding wasn't there yet, right? And being able to go through, but there's always going to be those business pressures. Well, why are you holding on to this? Why are you releasing?
Why are you holding on to this money? I want to use it for something else.
Right. But at the end of the day, it really goes down to the data of, and it's not going to be perfect. Did you evaluate what that risk is, what the materiality of that risk is, and then how, did you effectively mitigate it? And if you need that to mitigate it for the overall health of the program, you can usually justify it, not always. Anyway, with that, we are at time at 12:45. I want to thank everyone in our audience for joining us today. We hope this discussion helped you create more effective resiliency and contingency plans for your programs. If you have any questions, would like to put out any other insights, any thoughts on what we talked about, please reach out, contact Zodiac. They're experts in this space, and we'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.